Also, we're asking everyone to we're asking everyone to respect one another. We do have a timekeeper. I am your timekeeper. So when you see a yellow or orange sign say 2 minutes, please wrap it up in 2 minutes. Or Miss CC will have to put her Ermine hats. Okay, so we don't want that to happen. So at the same time, we're also asking everyone to please share it. Please share this form with your on your social media, with your family, your friends, and your network, for we can spread this good news about hurricane preparation in New Orleans. Now I will turn it over to Miss Cece. All questions will be asked at the end unless Miss Cece see otherwise. But you can put your questions in the chat. Miss Brooke and I would check the chat and see you have any questions or any concerns. The chat is being monitored by Miss Brooke and myself. And also, again, please be respectful. Thank you. I'm gonna turn it over to you, to Miss CC.
Hello, everyone. We've come together to talk about whether we're ready or not in terms of the hurricane preparedness. But before we get started, let me ask Brooke. Brooke, would you kindly introduce the panel members that you have invited, Justice and Beyond has invited to be a part of this? Brooke? Brooke, we can't hear you.
We have Anna Wynn, who's here from
Would you start from the beginning? We didn't hear you initially. Start from the beginning, please.
Anna Wynn is here from NOLA Ready, or from Homeland Security, really, I suppose. Correct me, Anna, if you wish. And she's the Public Engagement Director. We have Craig Toomey from RTA. And Craig, I'm not sure exactly what your title is with RTA, but I know it's up there.
Management.
Pardon me?
I'm the Director of Emergency Management.
Oh, okay. Director of Emergency Management. Perfect. And JP Morrell is supposed to be here. And I think we're missing one other person. So I wasn't expecting to do this. I apologize. So can somebody help me out?
I'm sorry for putting you on the spot, but yeah, and it's General Russel Honoré.
Yes, General Honoré is supposed to be here too. So I imagine
who's here now? Who's present, please?
Craig Toomey is here, and Anna Wynn is here right now.
Wonderful.
And that is it at this point.
Well, that's great, because we have questions for Ms. Wynn and for Mr. Toomey, definitely.
Perfect.
So we can get started with the questions now. Ms. Wynn, the city announced that there are 15 listed sheltering sites, NORD facilities plus libraries. Which NORD centers and which library are those? And will these facilities include only cooling, power, and internet, if internet is available? And are these facilities available both pre, during, and post-storm? And what arrangements have been made to get people ready to go to the shelters? Ms. Wynn.
Yeah, so thank you all for inviting me. Like mentioned by Brooke and Justice Beyond, my name is Anna Wynn. I'm the Public Engagement Director for the New Orleans Office of Homeland Security Emergency Preparedness. We oversee NOLA Ready, which is the city's emergency preparedness campaign. So this question is a little bit nuanced, and so I'll try to keep it concise, but we do have 15 city-owned properties that are able to be activated as emergency resource centers and potentially as shelters. In both cases, traditionally, we would activate them post-storm. In some cases, we have done it in the middle of an activation for things like a hard freeze, which we did back in December. But for the most part, we would do it post disaster because, you know, being a city that is below sea level, it's hard to predict which buildings will be will weather through the storm. And so, you know, I'm happy to share the list of 15 sites, but it's really important to note that not all 15 sites will be activated at a given time. It's more of saying that there's 15 sites so that depending on the severity of damages and the resources available at a given time, we may activate all 15, we may activate only 8, like we did during Hurricane Ida. So we have designed the emergency plan called Emergency Resource Center to be mostly a daytime operation. So the goal is to provide a place to protect from extreme elements like extreme heat or extreme cold. The goal is also to make sure that these sites have information, Wi-Fi if possible, and then just, again, depending on the resources that are available, we would try to distribute it to these sites that are city ran. You know, during Hurricane Ida, it's really whatever resources were available, we tried to share out. So things like diapers or Ensure or MREs, we want to make sure that they're available to the public at large. What other parts of the question? The question around sheltering can be tricky. So traditionally up until Ida, you know, most of the state really relied on state ran shelters. And so those are ran by the Department of Child and Family Services and by the Governor's Office of Homeland Security, and oftentimes by Red Cross. The policy for the longest time, and even to this point, is that that DCFS and Red Cross will not open a shelter pre-storm, just again because we are below sea level and they don't want to send staff into a potentially a risky area. Since Ida, the city has been making moves to build out our local capacity to open up shelters, with much thanks to partnerships with NORD, the New Orleans Recreation Department, and thanks to help from Red Cross of providing shelter trainings to NORD employees, we've been slowly able to build out our capacity to open up shelters on ourselves. The likely scenario is that we would open up shelters again post-storm, depending on what the severities of disaster look like. But we do feel pretty confident in being able to open up a shelter within 24 to 48 hours if necessary. And then the plan would be to open that shelter and run that shelter until we're able to pass it over to the real experts, DCFS and Red Cross, so that they can really transition that into and then demobilize it when necessary.
Okay, well, let me just ask you, so where is that list and where can people find the list of the 15 sheltering sites?
Sure. So again, I want to just stress that these are what we call emergency resource centers. Not all of these sites are what we would consider shelter ready. So we look at, for shelter ready sites, we would look at, you know, ADA accessibility, we would look at showers, we would look at, you know, more capacity to open it up to public who would need to stay there overnight. Some of these sites may be used as a shelter, but it's, again, no guarantee. You can find the list of locations, the 15 locations at ready.nola.gov. If you go to our plan tab, there'll be a little button that says information about emergency resource centers. But I can tell you now, it's the Sanchez Multi-Service Center, Carrollton Hollygrove Multi-Service Center, Arthur Munday Center, Nix Public Library, the Milton Ladder Public Library, the Hubble Library, Algiers Library, Cutoff Community Center, Gurnon Brown Rec Center, Rosenwald, Treme, Joe Brown Rec Center, Stallings, Lyons, and Milne. And so we were able to really utilize 8 of the NORD rec centers during Hurricane Ida or after Hurricane Ida. And since then, we've been working to build out, you know, additional locations to identify the gaps so that people can work, you know, if they need to walk there, that they're able to do so.
Okay, what about the Smoothie King? How does that play into the whole, if people have to evacuate their homes? Is the Smoothie King online to be a shelter where people can actually sleep and what have you, eat, survive?
So the Smoothie King Center would not be the site of a shelter. If we were to open a refuge, the most likely location would be the convention center. And we reference the Smoothie King Center as a pre-storm location if we were to do the city assisted evacuation. The convention center we have been using, especially recently, for things like COVID. we used the convention center as a regional medical shelter during Hurricane Ida. And we also used it as a volunteer center, a donation center for Hurricane Laura evacuees. So since Hurricane Ida, we worked with Entergy to ensure that the convention center would be able to take on emergency generator power. That was not something we had available immediately after Ida, but last year we worked out with the convention center so that if we need to, we can, as long as we notify Entergy within 72 hours, we'd be able to power the entire convention center.
So in several online and in-person discussions about hurricane facilities for residents before and after the storm, the city has referred to the lighthouse facilities. How and when will the city make it clear that there are only 3 facilities completed and that each one is designated to serve only its immediate neighborhood with limited capacity?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So at New Orleans Homeland Security Emergency Preparedness, again, we're NOLA ready. Sometimes we go by either name. We've been working with Together New Orleans, which is the nonprofit that's been spearheading the Community Lighthouse Initiative. We've also been working with the crew of Red Beans and Glass Half Full, and they're spearheading the Get Lit, Stay Lit initiative, which is to put solar generators on restaurants. Our goal is to work in parallel with those locations so that we have both community-led resources and city-led resources, but that we're sharing the same information to residents immediately after the disaster. The thing that we really want to tackle is the spread of rumors or misinformation, which can be really challenging. That's what we saw after Katrina. It's what we saw after Hurricane Ida. We want to really make sure that residents, immediately after a disaster, if cell towers go down, that they have the most accurate information coming from the city. And so that's actually my responsibility during an activation, is to coordinate with throughout all the city departments, through the city council, through our nonprofit partners, to make sure that we're sharing the most accurate and relevant information to the public.
Okay, so how do you do that if the electricity is gone, if cell towers are down, and people are they're stuck in their homes, and if there's flooding? How do you plan to get the message out in that situation?
So for the city, this is a complicated question as well. So we've been building redundancies within the city to be able to communicate with each other within city departments. We've really enhanced the city's capabilities for radio communication, and so we have our own infrastructure within the city parish so that we're able to communicate with different locations. And so, we've been building out trainings for our reserve city employees and for our volunteers to be able to figure out what that communication looks like and to think about what happens if cell towers go down. That's really the best answer I have for you all right now. But it is something that is at the forefront of our priority list, especially for me, in thinking about what happens when internet's out and when cell towers go down. How do we get information out to the public in a timely manner? In addition to building in those redundancies within the city, last year, WWL Radio actually received this FEMA upgrade called an all hazards upgrade. So WWL is one of 14 radio stations in the country that has what they call a all hazards broadcast shelter. So we worked with WWL Radio and Jefferson Parish Emergency Management last year to be trained on if radio towers, radio broadcast also goes down, WWL Radio will have the capabilities to still send out radio broadcast. And so, with their help, I was actually trained along with other emergency managers and with Jefferson Parish on how to do that radio broadcast ourselves. And that would continue on until WWL Radio were able to, take back the reins and send staff in to help us out with disseminating information.
Well, that is really scary, as someone said in the chat room, because I can remember during Katrina, the only WWL was the constant, but you had to sit in your vehicle and have your motor running to tune into WWL at that point. So hopefully this is better. And I understand that
Yeah,
Councilman Morrell has joined us, and I have a question for him. I will get right back to you, and definitely have questions for Mr. Toomey. But Councilman, the city says there will be generators to power each of these sheltering sites. Have they been procured, and when will they be put in place? For those not hooked up to permanent natural gas lines, do we have the manpower and fuel to keep them running? Councilman. Is Councilman hearing us? Councilman Morrell. Okay, so can someone call him to see if Val or Brooke call the councilman to see what's going on with his joining?
I'm happy
joining
to answer this question as well.
Okay, well, go for it.
Yes, so my department, so again, no step, we've been working really closely with Entergy since Ida to make these upgrades and transitions. So last year, we successfully initiated this partnership with Entergy. So the 15 city-owned properties that I mentioned, again, I put the link in the chat. They have transfer switches on them. So they don't have permanent generators. But what the challenge was during Hurricane Ida was being able to connect a temporary generator to these buildings. And so that was a big challenge for us in the immediate aftermath of Ida. Since then, we have now been able to put these transfer switches onto this 15 buildings. We also have been able to put transfer switches on the convention center. So again, we're now able to fully power the convention center if we need to, but they're not permanent. They would be temporary diesel generators or temporary gas generators that Entergy would help us procure. And they have committed to doing so for us during the case of a storm or disaster with at least 72 hours notice from the city. We are also looking at installing solar power generators. That's not something that will be ready for this year, but we recently received federal grants to do a study on the Sanchez Center to not only have that temporary generator, so we have the temporary generator plan in place. In addition, we're looking at solar generators. So we're looking at studying Sanchez Center on, what would it take to do that? And then from there, expanding out to other city-owned properties and then enhancing, the energy grid by developing microgrids.
Well, I don't know how they did it, but during Katrina, I evacuated to a friend's house in Kentwood, Louisiana, and they actually were distributing generators to the homeowners there. So maybe Entergy can buy generators and give us generators, because everyone, number one, you can't buy generators during a storm, and number two, they're extremely expensive. I know, because our generator went out and we had to buy another one most recently. So that's just food for thought. But let me ask Ms. Go on.
So Entergy would not buy these. They would procure them themselves or relocate their existing generators. This is with contracts that Entergy has with other contractors and things like that. So we wouldn't be buying it. It would be essentially borrowing it for these city-owned properties.
Yeah,
if the city were to tell Entergy, hey, we're planning on opening these sites. We need power on these buildings. Can you get it here? Can you get it on these buildings? So that I just wanted to clarify that as well. We wouldn't be buying generators.
No. What I'm suggesting is that Entergy buy generators for each one of their customers, because we certainly pay enough money every month for our services. And when the services go out, try getting any reciprocity back from Entergy for that, and you're left with, anyway, let me just ask Mr. Toomey. Mr. Toomey, RTA is reducing bus routes right now to repair the fleet while also having difficulty recruiting drivers. How will the decreased number of buses and drivers be able to transport all the people who need city-assisted evacuation to get people to the, it says here, Smoothie King Center?
That's correct. So thanks for having me. I really appreciate you inviting me. Really good question. So over the last couple of years, actually since the vacuum spots were created, I think right after Katrina, the RTA agreed to offer for every year working with the city, we would offer 2 dedicated buses per vacuum spot. That totals to a little over 30 buses that are dedicated just to do transport from the vacuum spots to Smoothie King. Having looked at the location of the vacuum spots and also having redesigned our transit system to be more equitable and serve neighborhoods that have more carless households, we took a look at the vacuum spots, and we actually plotted them over our transit system and found that many of the spots we have existing bus routes that go by the vacuum spots, with the exception of Warren Easton, which will have for our plan, we'll actually have a bus bridge on Canal as a replacement for the streetcar. So to answer your question, to make up for the shortage, and also right now we currently have 100 bus operators that are ready to go, that are ready to go to assist with the evacuation as of today. But to answer your question, what we plan on doing is using the existing evacuation spots and trying to maintain our entire system for as long as possible, and then leveraging our transit hubs. And our plan for general population evacuation is to transport folks. If the bus is full, for example, during evacuation, it would go right to Smoothie King, but not running half-empty buses to Smoothie King. The reason why we don't want to do that is because we don't maximize the amount of folks that are on the bus, to a limit, obviously. We don't want to make people uncomfortable during the evacuation, but we want to try to fill at least 80% capacity on each bus, so we maximize the trip through the Smoothie King to drop people off at the Smoothie King Center. So that's one thing we adjusted to make up for that shortfall, like you mentioned. So that's what our plan is.
Okay, and Mr. Toomey, how's the public going to know where these evacuation spots are?
So the evacuation spots are currently, I believe the city does an excellent job telling people where the spots are. But in our current plan, any bus stop will take you to the Smoothie King Center. What will happen is the entire transit system will go into evacuation mode once the order is given to evacuate. And so every bus, anyone can catch a bus anywhere and since 90% of our buses go downtown, the logic is that we'll have people getting to the Smoothie King Center general population via a regular bus system. And then getting shuttled we'll have some shuttle service. We'll have some buses that will either go directly from the hubs to Smoothie King if they're full, but we'll also have, if we need them, we'll have a couple extra buses to do dedicated routes from the hubs, or 5 transit hubs, to the Smoothie King. But I know the city's done a great job telling folks where the evacuation spots are located every year through NOLA Ready.
Okay, so let me ask Ms. Nguyen. Ms. Nguyen, what did you say about the Smoothie King Center?
So I would stress that that if in the case of a hurricane or any tropical weather, to follow local media, sign up for NOLA Ready text alerts, and just keep an ear out, because we say Smoothie King Center pre-storm. That is the point, the parish pickup point. So if we're doing a city assisted evacuation before the storm makes landfall, the goal is to utilize the Smoothie King Center as the centralized point where RTA would bring individuals to the Smoothie King Center, and from the Smoothie King Center, the state would send charter buses to evacuate individuals to state-ran shelters. I stress not relying too heavily on the Smoothie King Center, because the nuance is that if we're doing a post-storm evacuation, we may use the convention center. In the past, we've looked at using Union Passenger Terminal. And so, again, while we mentioned Smoothie King Center or Convention Center, it's really important to stay connected with NOLA Ready, to stay connected with local media. I see we have WGNO on the line right now. It's really important to stay connected, because that is going to be the source of the most accurate information. And, again, depending on storm severity, the storm may knock out the Smoothie King Center, or the storm may knock out the Convention Center, and we have to identify another location. And the last thing that I want, that Craig wants, that I'm sure everyone here on this call wants, is to, in the middle of trauma and distress, to go to the convention center and find out that we're not actually operating from the convention center. So it's really important to stay connected with us, to follow local media as best as possible, because that is where we will share the most accurate information of where to go, what is happening, what is available, and how the city is planning to help assist people before or after a storm.
What is the, and this goes, is the councilman with us yet? Well,
She didn't want to hear it, huh?
oh, there you are. Okay, how are you? I got questions for you. Okay, so let me see. So the question I was holding for you, after Ida, City Council passed an ordinance requiring all independent living facilities, senior apartment buildings to be licensed and to meet emergency preparedness requirements in order to qualify for licensing. Nursing homes are licensed and must meet higher standards. As of now, 1/3 of the 67 identified independent living facilities have not complied. A dozen have not even responded. These were the sources of most of the deaths from Ida and many during Hurricane Katrina. What will be done to get the rest ready quickly?
Okay, Miss Cece, I don't see Councilman President.
He's not here?
No, I do
Yeah.
not see, and we trying to contact him. We're unable to reach him at this time. So can you please go to the next one? We'll let you know when we get him. Thank you.
Yeah, he's
Okay.
still not on.
Okay, yeah, because I was looking at the television just the other day on hurricane preparedness. I think it was WWL, by the way. And they were suggesting that if you have relatives in nursing homes or, assisted living facilities, that you go and get them yourself. And I'm like, that's going to be a hot mess. Okay. I mean, I'm a former nurse. I worked in nursing homes, and so I understand the dynamics that go on there. So there must be a better plan. The city must have a better plan for evacuating, and the nursing homes themselves for evacuating the elderly and the sick. So we need that question answered. That's a very important question to be answered. Okay, well, let's go back to did your General Honoré come through as yet? We're not familiar. Okay, so back to Mr. Toomey. It's stated on NOLA Ready site that buses will operate on a Saturday schedule. Does that apply to evacuation pickups or transporting people to shelters, or both? And where will evacuees access bus service, and how will RTA inform the public in advance of a hurricane?
Sure. So the plan right now is for us to actually operate off schedule. So we're really going to have about 20 for a pre-storm evacuation. We're probably only going to have about 24 hours to evacuate everybody to the Smoothie King Center. And so the plan is just continuously run bus service for 24 hours, maybe even longer, to get as many people as we can to the Smoothie King Center in the shortest period of time. So as far as running an actual schedule, we weren't going to have a schedule at all. We just want to run a continuous service on the routes to get everybody there.
Miss Cece,
Justice and Beyond has been discussing the counterflow issue. Is anyone on here that can speak to where we are with the counterflow
Yeah, I'm happy to take this question. I'm also
situation, Ms. Wynn, or Mr. Toomey?
Yeah, I'm also happy to talk about the independent living facilities, but let me tackle contraflow first. So contraflow is a plan that is managed by the state. It involves over 20 different agencies at the local and state level. And we are the only state to actually have to collaborate with a neighboring state to activate this plan. And so, with contraflow, the state organizes a meeting regularly every year, right before the start of hurricane season. And, the reality is that these storms are becoming rapidly intensified. And so what I mean by that is that with a lot less notice, we're seeing storms get stronger a lot faster, which makes them much more unpredictable and much more dangerous. We saw that with Hurricane Ida. We saw that with Hurricane Ian last year in Florida. And so the ability to actually activate contraflow is becoming increasingly difficult. So, you know, we say that contraflow is a method of last resort because we don't want people to wait until contraflow is enacted. You know, right before contraflow is enacted, the city is actually already messaging voluntary evacuation and or mandatory evacuation. And so if contraflow were to be enacted, it would be at H-30, so 30 hours before the storm reaches the coast. We don't want people to wait until then. We want people to evacuate as soon as they're able to, which is why throughout hurricane season, we really stress for everyone to reevaluate their hurricane plans with their families, with their friends, and really account for your neighbors. Or, you know, you mentioned, you know, if you're able to evacuate with your loved ones from independent living facilities or from nursing homes, we really encourage you to factor those individuals into your plans because, you know, it's a whole community effort. You know, the city is going to do what we can to assist as best as possible, but really the best plan is to talk through what you're capable of doing yourself. If you can evacuate yourself, please evacuate. If you can take neighbors, if you have seats in your car and you're able to take neighbors who don't have their own transportation, we really encourage everyone to talk to their neighbors, talk to their loved ones, and to factor in individuals and making sure that you factor them into your plan. You know, the thing about contraflow is that this is an issue across the board, across the country. This is not just an issue that we're dealing with in Louisiana. Everywhere, if you were asked, if you were asked the state of Louisiana, if you were asked any of the Gulf Coast states, if you were to even ask, you know, I know North Carolina has a contraflow plan. Everyone is dealing with the same issue, which is climate change has caused these hurricanes to come a lot faster and a lot stronger. And so what we had traditionally planned for emergencies as a city or as a state or as a parish, that we're having to really reevaluate what those plans look like and factor in that these storms are not giving us as much time as they used to in the past. This is an issue that we've really seen across the board. We've gone to conferences, we've gone to trainings, we've had one-on-one meetings with other emergency management agencies, and it's really difficult to, you know, everyone is now starting to shift their mindset. You know, we do want to have individuals evacuate, especially if they rely on power for life-sustaining equipment, or for particularly seniors and children, because we know that seniors and children are more susceptible to heat illness than somebody who is healthy. And so again, if you are able to evacuate, that's what we encourage as the first plan. But we are, you know, again, like I mentioned earlier, developing out contingency plans. So, you know, looking at modifying the city's assisted evacuation to focus more specifically on seniors and getting out people with disabilities first. We built out, and this is something we did after Ida, is the post-storm evacuation. So if we don't have enough time to evacuate people before the storm, you know, what do we need to have in place to evacuate people immediately after the storm? So that's what we're looking at. I see a question in here about what do people do who are too ill to leave their homes. So another thing we really encourage everyone on this call to do is to sign up for Smart 911. That is an enhanced version of the NOLA Ready text alert, and I'll put a link in the chat for folks. But it's similar. It's the city's transition from the special needs registry. So through Smart 911, you are able to let the city know if you have a mobility challenge, if you have medical challenge, or if you depend on life-saving equipment, you know, as much information as you're willing to share. That not only helps emergency planners flesh out our emergency plans better, it also allows first responders to have better information if you were to call 911 and to report an emergency outside of hurricane season. And so that is what we will rely on to gather information of where hotspots are to pick people up. Again, if we were to do a city-assisted evacuation or a refuge, then we would share this information through press conferences, through social media, to our media partners, again, who are on the line. And so we really urge folks to stay connected. Please sign up for NOLA Ready text alerts. We only ever send messages when there's an emergency and we want to share preparedness tips. I and the rest of the department fiercely defends the use of that list because we have over 280,000 opt-in subscribers. They're not the same, when you get the wireless emergency alert that, sets off your phone with a buzzard. That's something we can do. The NOLA Ready the NOLA Ready emergency alerts are a more friendly version of that. And we're able to share tips. We're able to notify you sooner rather than just when a tornado is on the ground or when a hurricane's on the way.
Let me ask you this.
Thank you for sharing that link, Raymond.
Let me ask you this, and I think Brooke will moderate the chat questions in a few minutes. But so basically, we should not, as residents, depend on having the ease of contraflow at all, right?
I would say contraflow does not actually make things easier. Contraflow is actually worse. I remember I was 13, 14 when Katrina happened, and my family waited until contraflow to leave. And what's typically a 5-hour drive turned into 20, 22 hours because now everyone's trying to leave. If you actually leave before contraflow takes effect, you have a better chance of getting to your destination sooner than you would when contraflow happens. And so again, we're really stressing to not wait until the last minute. If you have the capability to evacuate, and when we call a voluntary evacuation or mandatory evacuation, you should leave as soon as possible because the last thing you want is to get stuck in that traffic. It's really terrible. My mom and my sister and my family, while I was here during Hurricane Ida, contraflow didn't happen, but they also waited till the last minute, just like everyone else did. And they again got stuck in traffic for 26 hours going to Houston. And so again, contraflow is meant as a last resort, but we don't want people to wait until contraflow takes effect. We want people to leave as soon as we say, please leave. This is a voluntary evacuation, especially if you have seniors in your plan or you have people who depend on power for life-saving equipment, or you need things like refrigeration for your insulin or things like that.
So another, and I have 2 more questions, and then Brooke can open the chat questions because they're very important questions in the chat room. But
I think JP is on now too, and Honoré is on his way.
Okay, well then let's go to Councilman. Oh, we got questions for the Councilman.
Can y'all hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Okay, so we were asking about the generators. I think Ms. Nguyen answered that question, but and we talked about the contraflow. She answered that question. But one important question that some of the pillars of Justice and Beyond have posed are about the independent living facilities and about the fact that a lot of these nursing homes have failed to comply with the license requirements. As of now, 1/3 of the 67 identified independent living facilities have not complied. A dozen have not even responded. These were the sources of most of the deaths from Ida and many during Hurricane Katrina. What will be done to get the rest of these nursing homes and independent living facilities ready, whatever the evacuation plan may be?
Well, as you may recall, that readiness program is not just for the evacuation, it's also for those people who choose to stay behind as well. So the enforcement of that fell upon code enforcement and Department of Health. And I believe that
Yeah.
disclosure about the number of not in compliance and non-responsive came from Dr. Avegno's briefing, I want to say a week ago. So Councilman Moreno and I have been in contact with Dr. Avegno to begin the process of revisiting with these groups, because as you know, part of the penalty inside of that ordinance is suspending licensure and occupancy and other enforcement mechanisms to force compliance. So my initial conversation with Dr. Avegno was that the ones that were not in compliance were working to get in compliance. The ones that are the most problematic are the ones that are non-responsive. And so they're working through that process, but that's where things stand currently. So the fact that the Department of Health had the information on hand means that at the very least, the city's tracking and trying to make enforcement, try to compel enforcement, but it is disappointing that they haven't gotten there yet. And more distressing is that despite the fact of the Dean incident on the North Shore, where all those people were put in the warehousing, there's been no assurances that there's been any change in state policy in regards to their regulatory process. Because as you know, the bulk of the regulatory rules that nursing homes follow are actually not local, they're state. And the nursing homes are a very powerful lobby. There were some efforts after the last hurricane cycle, after the Mr. Dean incident, to try and curb those kind of abuses. But my understanding is there has not been a tremendous amount of movement. So we're in contact with the state as well to see what resources they can bring to bear, because the state Department of Health is really the biggest hammer with the biggest nail.
Thank you for that answer. So another question I think was very pertinent. We discussed before you came on, how will the public be notified of the evacuation spots, of the transportation availabilities with RTA? How will the people be notified beyond the text, the text thing that happens with NOLA Ready? And if the cell towers are down, if the electricity is off, and if we cannot get information, Ms. Nguyen did talk about WWL's enhanced capabilities, but someone brought up a question, and I think it's a question that perhaps the city council can think about. Why not have some type of siren to notify people of, this is really bad, maybe you need to think about evacuating? What do you say, Councilman?
Well, I know after the last New Orleans East Arabi tornado, there were some conversations about bringing back tornado sirens. And those are really the only type of sirens cities really use. It's a conversation we're having, it's ongoing, but tornado sirens are very specific, because you have a tornado siren because a tornado spontaneously appears and you have to have people react to that immediately. There's a big difference between a tornado and a hurricane. A hurricane, we typically have as much as a week's notice that we're in the cone of certainty. There is a lot of outreach that's done both from text, from media, from the internet, from the newspapers, and through all those different groups to try and make resources available. I do think it's worth investigating, looking at things like having maybe a print activity go out at the beginning of hurricane season, maybe to different areas explaining where their location is. But other than doing mail at this point, everything else is done. I mean, the media has been a pretty good partner as far as leading up to an event, letting people know where that stuff is. The internet and social media have become shorthand for trying to get that information out and push it as quickly as possible. There is always the challenge of what happens when the cell towers go down, but by the time the cell towers have gone down, you're pretty much in the hurricane at that point. Typically, we don't have cell tower issues pre-hurricane or up to the event. And at that point, once that's hit, you're pretty much in shelter in place anyway.
So I had another question. And this is just for a comment, actually, and food for thought. As we were discussing Entergy, and Entergy is going to try to provide generators and solar panels and lighthouse and all this other stuff, whatever is going on. But average citizen, I can recall during the last hurricane or the one before that, I'm getting so many, I can't even remember which is which, but I recall that, our generator went out here at my home and my husband had to go out. He was lucky enough to buy another one, but most of the time generators are not available. I can remember during Katrina, I evacuated to Kentwood, and there, that county was providing generators. I don't know if it was their electricity company, or the provider, but they were providing generators to the people. Could Entergy do something like that here?
It's an interesting prospect. The thing you have to remember is that whenever we compel Entergy to do something, ratepayers have to pay for it. Entergy doesn't do anything for free. So right now, I'm in the midst of a aggressive renegotiation on the Energy Smart program, because I think as it's currently operating, it's not really bringing much relief to people who are trying to have more resilient and efficient homes. It's something worth looking at, but as a council, as regulators, we have to be cognizant of pushing more energy costs on the ratepayers for anything. I know that there is a lot of effort nationally, including through FEMA, to see what can be done preemptively in hurricane prone areas to make them more resilient. I don't think they even believe generators is the answer, because the problem you have with most generators is that they're gas dependent. And the wake of most disasters.
Go on.
Sorry.
Go on. I think that does General Honoré speaking to someone in his house or somewhere, wherever he is. Go on. Complete
Most
your thoughts.
of the generators that are commercially available are typically the gas ones you buy at Lowe's. And the challenge you have is that the more generators we have out there, and typically the more generators we have out there, if there's gas scarcity, it doesn't give anybody any security that they'll be able to have those generators on, because obviously during Ida, as you saw, gas became a significant issue.
Yeah.
I think that what we tried to do, working with Pastor May and other groups with the Lighthouse program, is try to provide some security blanket or overlay and having some resilient places that can provide energy and resources in communities themselves. I think that any effort we have as a council to make solar panels more affordable, as well as batteries more affordable, to make individual homes more resilient. We had a lot of success with individuals with solar panels and batteries that were able to exist off the grid post Ida with no assistance from Energy or anyone else. Those are more the things we're interested in. The problem with those is that it's hard to scale those down to individual households. I think Lighthouse has been such a fantastic idea and program we're trying to expand, because there is an economy of scale of getting that almost commercial level of solar power to those individual churches and centers around the city as a safety net. But long-term, microgrids are probably going to be the way for us to have resilient energy transmission during a hurricane. A thing to remember is that though the council regulates Entergy New Orleans inside of New Orleans, almost all the power comes through transmission lines that are in Energy Louisiana, Energy Mississippi, Energy Arkansas, Energy East Texas. They don't have the same resiliency standards we do. And as you saw during Ida, when those massive energy towers fell into the river, those were in Energy Louisiana territory, which means our oversight over them is zero. The council passed its recent resiliency program so that we're trying to push that as they replace poles around the city, for example, we're not simply replacing wooden poles that were good during the 50s with new wooden poles that were good during the 50s, because obviously in states that have hurricane situations, Florida in this one instance is a good example, that their energy towers are now rated to withstand 120 to 140 hour wind. That's really where we have to move as a city and as a region, because the reality is with climate change, we're just going to have more and more hurricanes and events, and kind of putting our head in the sand, ignoring it, and pretending that our infrastructure currently as it's been is going to be sufficient. It's just not possible.
Thank you, Councilman. Let me ask General Honoré a question. General Honoré, we remember your response after Ida about the lack of hurricane preparations. And so the question is, are we ready now?
Well, you can, I think we are in good shape with the levee system. I'm concerned about the recovery of the aftermath of Ida. When you go in the lower parishes down to St. Charles, had over 400 people still in trailers, and go down to Lafourche, there's about 500 families still in recreation trailers. I'm concerned about more people living in trailers, that anytime there's a hurricane coming, we're going to have a massive evacuation out of the lower parishes. And based on a prediction, where do those people go? Do they come to New Orleans and stop? Or do they keep going east, west, or north? That's what I'm concerned about. I'm also concerned that the state really hadn't practiced the mass evacuation, where we turn the interstate into one way, so all the traffic can leave. Is called contraflow. It was hesitated during Katrina. It was a problem, and we haven't practiced that since. I'm concerned that doing preparedness, like we do, we look back at Ida, the state and the local municipality in New Orleans spent so much energy on security. They had National Guard with M4s out on Canal Street, but then we had thousands of elderly people in high rises with no connection to anybody in the government. And we know it cost a lot of lives of elderly folks in old folks' homes. I'm concerned about the evacuation of those homes. We had a lot of issues with that. We had people die as a result of carelessness with the old folks' home. I see some incremental improvements in energy and strengthening the grid. But anytime you get a Category 3 storm come, it's going to be bad. And I think, particularly in the New Orleans area and South, we need to be evacuating at a Hurricane 2 the vulnerable population, particularly. And we learned a lot about roofs. A lot of the roofs that were nailed with 6 nails held. The older roofs that were only had 4 nails in them, most of those got lost. I think the state has a good plan to respond with the National Guard. Our National Guard do a great job of supplementing the parishes. I'm concerned with the evacuation plan because the state leave it up to the parish government to declare an evacuation. And the way the law reads, if the mayor of New Orleans said mandatory evacuation, at the bottom line, it's really not mandatory. You can't make people leave. So we could end up with a lot of people in New Orleans again without power, because a Category 3 storm will challenge that electric grid, will take it down. And if it's not a storm, the hurricane itself, you could get tornado force winds if the storm is east or west of New Orleans and take the grid down. So we all need to be prepared with 3 to 5 days supply of food and water at home. And we cannot be reluctant to evacuate. The other thing about culture we got to instill in people, I've been preaching since Katrina, is don't leave any neighbors. Don't expect somebody else to get that elderly person next to you. And the bottom line was, don't leave with an empty seat. Find somebody to take with you, fill your car up, and get folks out of town. And a lot of folks go to relatives, which is good. Because the shelters, if you have spent any time in the shelter, as good as they can make them, it's a very uncomfortable place. So going to friends and relatives in distant towns is the best option for people. And I'm very concerned again about the elderly evacuation in the elderly care homes and nursing homes, because we did not do that well. And I'm not sure if that's fixed yet, because they leave it up to the operator of the nursing home to decide if he's going to evacuate. I think a mandatory evacuation, it's got to be mandatory for nursing homes. It may be different under the law for people in their homes if they're going to evacuate, but I think we need to have a law in Louisiana on the mandatory evacuation. You've got to get the elderly out that's in nursing homes, because we've seen what happened in the situations last year. But are we prepared? I think this storm reminded everybody, because we had got into a stage after Katrina and we really hadn't had a bad storm since then. This is a reminder that Mother Nature can break anything built by man. And if you have folks with health issues, if you have nothing to do, don't stay at home and watch your stuff. A lot of people want to stay home and watch their stuff. Think somebody's going to come in their house and take their stuff. Don't worry about your stuff, because if the wind don't get you, the flood waters will. We live in a flood zone. Everything south of I-10 is a flood zone. And north of I-10, my concern in the north of the lake is that they keep building subdivisions in flood zones, which is totally stupid. And they're building them at elevation. They're not building them at 10 to 12 feet, which is the predicted level of surge you could get in St. Tammany Parish. One of these days, one of these storms is going to push that water to the north, and it's going to get into St. Tammany Parish. And it's going to be a mess, because they built so many homes along the lake and in those canals that they've drilled, and it's going to be a mess. And a lot of those homes are not raised. I hope that answered part of your question, but I'll stand by for if there's a follow-on.
Thank you, General. I wanted to ask the councilman again, and this is Councilman Morrell. I'm pretty sure this is just, maybe it's undoable. I don't happen to believe anything's impossible, but what are the odds of having some of these power lines buried underground? Because every storm, we go through the same thing with the poles coming down. Then, you know, even if we get a hard rain, we don't have electricity. When is the city going to look at energy and say, we cannot deal with 18th century technology, we need to do better?
Well, we certainly, when we create the resiliency plan, that was one of the considerations. The major issue with putting the poles underground, existing poles underground, is that when we have historically priced it, it's been cost prohibitive. And by cost prohibitive, I mean, whenever we're doing infrastructure improvements, that goes on your energy bill. And that's not something that, when you look at the sheer cost we're looking at for doing that, you're talking about close to probably several $100 million to do the whole city. It's not something that's off the table, but it's one of those things where, as we're trying to figure out what resiliency in New Orleans looks like, it's certainly part of the mix. Plus, even if we were to go that route, you're talking about that would probably be a multi-year plan. So we have the resiliency docket. It's in the, I believe it's in the climate committee of the New Orleans City Council. And that's certainly something we're considering, but the biggest consideration with that is going to be cost and time. So it's not off the table, but if it's too much, I don't want to ever be in a situation where, in order for us to make this city have underground power lines, we make it so it's unaffordable for people to live here.
Well, I do recall that when President Biden was here recently touring, was it Ida or the one before? I don't know. Like, again, we have so many hurricanes, I don't know which is which, but he was here and he did mention the fact that we need to have the power lines put underground. So maybe you need to talk to our Representative Carter about this. Maybe there's federal money. I think
one of the biggest issues we have, and it's something I know Councilman Moreno's talked about frequently, we the cities and states that have municipalized power, it is easier to get federal funds to supplement and rebuild after you have an event. What you're seeing across the United States is that in cities and states where you have private companies, there are a variety of different federal acts that prohibit direct federal aid to private companies. And it's something we've been really struggling with, because even after Ida, as we tried to minimize costs to ratepayers to do all that infrastructure repair, in those few areas around the country that have had significant damage due to natural events, it's much easier for FEMA to give them money, because money from government to government is usually pretty easy and it's not prohibited by federal law. It's something that we're looking at as well. I mean, it's not something we could do tomorrow as far as municipalizing our electrical grid and kicking energy out, because obviously the biggest problem you have whenever you go that route is that you have to essentially buy back the infrastructure, because energy has also made investments. But it's something that is certainly not off the table, but it's also one of those things where it would be a very lengthy process.
Thank you, Councilman. I'm going to turn it over to Brooke and Valerie now. Thank you so much for answering the questions. And so there are people in the chat room that have questions, so I'm going to turn it over to you guys to moderate those. Thank you so much, Ms. Nguyen, Mr. Toomey, General Honoré, and Councilman Morrell.
Thank you so much, CC. You always on time. You are a good moderator. We will call on you anytime. We appreciate you. Now we do have a couple of questions in the chat. Mr. Sweet, I see you as the first one. You would like to ask your questions, and please keep it your question and your comments down to 1 minute. Please, thank you.
Hey, I just wanted to ask about people getting paid, the city employees that are staffing. There was a big to-do last hurricane when people had to fight for money, and I hope we move beyond that now, and that people getting paid and properly paid for their duties, for staying behind.
Yeah, so that's a really great question. Thank you so much, Raymond, and for your other questions in the chat. So since Hurricane Ida, the city so my department again has been working with the CAO's office to revise city policies. So we are able to, we have this is a little nuanced, so I'll just bear with me, but city employees are put into one of two categories, either essential or they're considered reserve. So if you're considered an essential employee, you are expected and required to stay throughout the storm or throughout any emergency to continue the city function. So you're looking at sanitation workers, you're looking at your emergency managers, you're looking at me and the rest of the NOLA Ready team. We're all considered essential employees, and we do track our hours that we work during an activation, and we are paid for that. The policy that's changed since Ida is that we are now able to activate reserve employees. So reserve employees are, employees that would not have to report to City Hall if City Hall were closed. But we are able to now activate reserve employees as essential. So we did this during Ida, and since Ida, we've really fleshed out how this process looks. So if we were to need staff to work at a cooling center or a warming center or to help with evacuation, we are able to activate those reserve employees and pay them appropriately. We actually just sent out a survey last month to all city employees. It's around 1,400 city employees, not including the airport, the library, or public safety agencies. So of the 1,400 employees, we got about 950 responses back. We're actually working with department directors to get the rest of the responses, but of the 950, approximately 450 employees said that they would be willing to stay and help through an emergency. And so we have really fleshed that policy out better with the CAO to make sure that people are paid appropriately, especially if we're asking someone to assist the city when they have their own families or their own loved ones or pets to care for. And so we were very intentional about asking before hurricane season started, because these are conversations that city employees need to have with their families and friends, and making plans that for other dependents. And so, you know, I just actually reviewed my plan. I have a dog, and you know, I want to make sure that my dog is taken care for. So, you know, that's one of the things I do at the start of hurricane season, is I make sure that, like, I have a friend or a family member who commits to evacuating my dog with them, so that I can stay behind and assist the rest of the city. And so these are ongoing developments. You know, there's always room for improvement. You know, one of the things that we'll be further fleshing out over the summer is a more intentional training program around disability etiquette, around you know, what to expect and how to prepare if we ask you to stay behind for an emergency, or if we ask you to come back and to assist an emergency. So in some cases, people might stay through the storm, and those will be the essential employees. If we ask reserve employees to come back, it'll likely be after the storm, and the city would arrange, you know, a place for those employees to sleep, making sure that they're fed and making sure that they're paid for.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Anna. Also, Ms. Anna, can you put in the chat the departments and the employees that you are speaking of, that everyone would know, including the employees themselves, they would know that they fall in this category.
Ms.
Essential,
Jefferson, Ms. Jefferson,
yes.
let's not let RTA off the hook on answering that question if they have.
Okay.
If you got an answer for you.
Okay,
Okay,
we
sure, of course.
we have very
So-
limited time, and we have a lot of questions, just so
Yeah, sure,
everybody
real quick,
knows.
I'll answer really quick. So yeah, we do the same process as the city. After Ida, we learned our lesson about emergency pay. So our board passed a resolution granting emergency pay. Our union contract also includes emergency pay as well. And then those folks that are going to be assisting with hurricane response during their evacuation are designated as essential in writing. So we've corrected that problem.
Okay. Do that conclude your question, Mr. Sweet? Next we have Beth. Okay. Next we have Beth. Beth, you have a question? Please keep your question to 1 minute, please.
Okay, we have a couple of quick questions right here.
Okay, yes, wait a minute, just a second, Brooke. Beth was next. Thank you.
Hi, thank
And
you.
Bethany was actually next, but okay, yeah.
Well, I defer to Bethany. It's okay.
Okay, Beth.
All right, my question is quick. Are the toilets in the convention center electric, or can they be operated manually?
I'll answer that question, unless they've changed it since Katrina. Those toilets, after convention center was built, went to a enhanced flushing system that's electric. I want to remember, like every 5 toilets, one of them will flush manually. What we discovered when I went in with my soldiers after Katrina was the people could have used those toilets if we had a generator to run the electricity that goes specifically to the latrines, the toilets, the restrooms. I don't know if the city or the convention center authority who runs the convention center has ever fixed that. I've talked to 3 mayors about that. I don't know if it ever got done, but the convention center is a place that people, as we saw after Ida, can go. But if you have power to the convention center, particularly to the restrooms, you can shelter people there. The state and the city has taken a position they don't want to shelter in New Orleans. Now, when he did so in Ida, because of COVID and the prediction on the storm, but I'm a believer that we should use the convention center as a shelter because there will be people that cannot get out of town, and New Orleans is still subject to flooding from rain if the levees hold and the barriers hold. But the convention center, that is the issue. And I can speak to, as of a few years ago, that had not been fixed. But I talked to Reagan, then Landrieu about it, and to the governor. But I don't know if that's ever been fixed because the convention center come under a separate board.
So, hi, General. This is Anna from Nola-Ready. I'm also from the New Orleans Office of Homeland Security Emergency Preparedness. We agree with you. So since Ida, we partnered with Entergy to New Orleans and updated the convention center's equipment so that we are able to fully power the convention center if needed. We would have to bring in an 18-wheeler generator truck, which Entergy says, again, that they're able to do with at least 72 hours notice. And so, you know, we did use the convention center for medical special needs shelter during Ida, as well as COVID, like you mentioned. And so, you know, we are working out what does that plan look like if we were to need a refuge in place at the convention center. You know, and that's an ongoing conversation of what does staffing look like, what resources does the city need so that we're able to do that, hopefully with some state assistance, but really recognizing that getting state assistance pre-storm will be very difficult.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'm gonna ask Miss Lane. Miss Lane, you would like to ask your question, please?
I'm sorry, Valerie, I put a bunch in.
Okay. Well, I'm looking at, okay, you can ask anyone, but I'm looking at the one you speaking of generators.
Oh, about the fuel reserves?
Yes.
Yeah, it's been mentioned several times that we don't know yet what generators will be brought in to the, I'm going to call them shelter sites because that's what they're called in most of the communications that I've seen, meaning the emergency resource centers. But you know, so you got a generator, and apparently each of those 15 has a natural gas, I'd like to call it fossil gas, line, permanent line installed. So they shouldn't need gas or gasoline or diesel. But the question is that there's so much talk about providing generators, perhaps there, but certainly in other places that may be gasoline or diesel powered. So my question is have arrangements been made so that we are sure we have reserve fuel, you know, as estimated might be needed if there's, let's say, a 2-week power outage, which is not unreasonable. Thank you.
Yeah, so Lane, I'm happy to take that, CC, if you're okay with that. So Lane, you bring up a really great question. And so, you know, we were really intentional about not installing permanent generators because one of the issues we saw during Hurricane Ida was that the storm itself actually damaged a lot of generators. And that really made things a lot more complicated to put on temporary generators, which is why we have, you know, the transfer switches were an easy installation that Entergy helped make. And that this way, Entergy is able to protect those generators and then put them on buildings that the city designates as potential site for the public. I actually really want to stress that these 15 sites are not all shelter sites because not all 15 are equipped to become shelters. So, for example, all of the library sites we would not make into a shelter where people could stay and shower and stay for a continuous period of time. But we would potentially activate these sites, these library sites in particular, as a place where people can go and keep cool from extreme heat, where they could charge their devices, where they could go seek out information about what is most up to date and most relevant to them. You know, I will admit that the page I shared could have more information about what the city plans to do pre-storm, post-storm, as it relates to sheltering. And that's something that is at the top of my priority list to have fleshed out, hopefully by the end of the month. As it keeps coming up as a question, last year we were pretty hesitant to share these list of locations because, again, we don't want for someone to see this list and say, oh, I live in Algiers, I see the Algiers Regional Library, I'm going to go to the Algiers Regional Library. When in fact, we may not use the Algiers Regional Library because it may be too badly damaged, because we may see a greater need in another part of town. So for example, thinking about the Algiers tornado in December, we have the capability of using the Algiers Regional Library or Cutoff or Arthur Munday, but that was really far away from the impacts of the tornado. So we actually ended up using Morris FX Jeff as a site for people to go to and either stay during the day. Then we actually did transition that into a shelter for people who were impacted by the tornado.
So that's the kind of information that would be sent by text message, or that's the kind of info, or both maybe. Also, it would be broadcast by, I guess, WWL radio.
So I somewhat regret mentioning WWL. So we would share this information to all media partners. So WWL, WGNO, WDSU, Fox 8, and then we would also utilize the NOLA Ready emergency alert system to notify individuals of what's available. So similar to, I'm going to use the Algiers tornado as just like as an example that's most recent, but we were able to message just to the Algiers residents who are on our list to say, hey, General de Gaulle is impacted because of the tornado. Here are the detours you want to take it for your morning commute. Hey, if you were impacted by the tornado, go to Morris FX Jeff for resources and information about how we can help, right? And so we would continue to do that and share that information to all media outlets, as well as use social media and the internet and rely on and work with the council to get this information out. One of the things that NOLA Ready did that was new and that we're really fleshing out further is what we call a post-emergency canvas operation. So in addition to sending out these messages, we would work with volunteer groups and volunteers to for things that are more localized, like tornadoes, to knock on doors in that area that was impacted to get an assessment of what the needs are and to share information. We hope to expand that out for hurricanes, but we're definitely working on developing out what that process looks like, what are standard operating procedures, and what sorts of materials can we prepare in advance so that when the situation happens, we can just pull the trigger and activate it.
Okay, we have another question from Lane. Lane, this all right? Can I read it right quick because time is going past us. This question by Lane, it's true.
Valerie?
Yes.
Beth had a question.
Okay, Beth.
Oh, thank you, CC and Valerie. A Community Voice did present the legislation that we're working on that Matt Willard has introduced, and it has passed now everywhere but on the floor and passed unanimously, which calls for funding studies on some of these issues. Frankly, the problem that we're looking at is that even though we have this house of cards and it looks like there's a structure, a lot of the components of the structure are going to fail, the ones we can't pick out today necessarily. But if you listen to 72-hour warning to get generators when we know the storms now pop up so quickly and become large overnight, that's obsolete. We're living through these kinds of problems. Hurricane Ida, no mandatory evacuation was called. We had deaths. We saw that in Florida, deaths. Mandatory evacuation has become an issue of political will because the business community doesn't want it to be called. So now you're seeing the National Weather Service just recently said they're going to start, there are advisories around flooding and surge, because what they're saying is we're going to try to give y'all some edge and some warning to get people out because of the surge. Because they recognized, because they've been working with our contraflow committee, what Texas and Florida have done is they've developed a plan called evacuate lanes, where the shoulders of the roads are made into separate lanes. Then you don't have to worry about the problems with contraflow, which we have in our state because we haven't called it since '08 because it's too hard.
Beth,
And
the question, Beth, the question, please. What's the question?
well, I think I would like to see, where we could go and with getting evacuate lanes. That's what A Community Voice is working on with this committee. Also getting sirens for New Orleans, and where we could get support for that. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Anyone want to answer that question? Where can they get support for their effort in the lanes in the siren?
Yeah, so I actually know Beth. I sit in on the committees and represent NOSAP. So good to see you again, Beth. So the evacuate lanes as well as contraflow are both plans and initiatives that would have to be led by the state. Of course, local jurisdictions would be involved in that conversation. But if it's related to anything highway, anything outside of Orleans Parish, that's a highway or interstate, that's managed by Louisiana Department of Transportation. And we talked a little bit about sirens, and the councilman really, I think, hit the nail on the head of that. Sirens are predominantly used in communities across the country for tornadoes or hazardous material spills. So we do have some sirens in Louisiana, but they are more in areas where there's a more chemical plant presence. Or where there's trains that are coming through and carrying a lot of hazardous materials. But like the councilman said, sirens for hurricanes are not necessarily off the table, but we are really focusing on developing out our plans around evacuation and around sheltering and refuge and what the city can provide in a post-storm situation.
Okay, Miss Lori. While Miss Lori getting her question together, her concern, please keep it down to 1 minute, Miss Lori, because we have like 2 minutes. And I want to put this question on Councilman JP mind for he can answer it. And I also have the last question to Mr. Toomey. Councilman JP is about lane question. Is it true that not only the cost goes on our energy bills, but also energy profit? And parenthetically, she have for their shareholders goes on our energy bill. Okay. And Mr. Toomey, your question is, have RTA updated a bus stops along with their emergency man that stand in those areas? So can you think about the answer while while Miss Lori asks her question, then Councilman JP, then you're gonna be the last one. Thank you. Okay, Miss Lori. She might be gone. Okay, Councilman JP, the energy question.
Yeah, so it's complicated. So the part of the reason why we have such a hard time forcing energy to do resiliency programs is because nationally, the way energy companies generate the majority of their profit is pretty much on useless maintenance. Whenever they have to replace that raggedy pole because a pole falls down, they charge us for that raggedy pole and they charge us for the labor to replace the raggedy pole. And what you've seen across the nation is the profit margins really swell when they don't take the time to make infrastructure more resilient and less prone to failure, because part of that real profit margin is on that unnecessary maintenance. It's sort of like at some point, when you go to get a used car and you keep getting it fixed and fixed and fixed, and it keeps getting more and more expensive. And at a point, it gets more expensive to fix the used car than to fix a new car. That's pretty much how our energy grid is. So yes, when it comes to certain aspects of when you're dealing with a private company, there is a profit motive you have to struggle with. It's part of the fight that I have with them currently over the Energy Smart program, and that Energy Smart, as it's envisioned, is supposed to make homes more resilient and energy efficient. But I've always questioned, how committed can a company be to making your home more energy efficient if your house being less energy efficient is what drives profit? So I've never been a proponent of the let's go hand out a couple of LED bulbs and maybe spray foam a window and that be the solution to making your home more resilient, and having energy have its own contractors, some of which aren't even from New Orleans. I've had people tell me I hired someone to come and tune up my AC pursuant to an energy advertisement, and Energy said since I didn't use the guy they hired from Lacombe, they refused to reimburse it. So there's a lot of stuff on the margins that adds up. The overall cost of power as a whole is very, very troubling, because many of you who have followed the Grand Gulf fiasco know that New Orleans is part of 4 states that owns a nuclear power plant in Alabama. That power plant has never seemed to work. And so basically taxpayers in this city, ratepayers, have paid to subsidize and maintain a power plant that is on as much as it's off. And whenever that power plant that we're paying for monthly goes down, Energy has to go on the market to itself to buy energy from itself to provide power to the areas that are affected. So I wouldn't say that switching to a more resilient network is going to be profitable for Energy, because in the long run, it is absolutely not profitable for them, even though the costs have to get borne by us. But there are certainly a lot of different ways and a lot of different instances in which past councils have not scrutinized what Energy's tried to pass on bills to customers and not save money that way. I mean, I feel like this council right now, I can only speak for the council I serve on, we have been very bullish on looking at every single bill to make sure we are paying for something that is owed by ratepayers and not just Energy trying to pass the buck to us.
Thank you. Thank you, President JP. We really appreciate that answer. Okay, next, Mr. Toomey. And I'm not, this will be the absolutely last question. And because we got to close.
Wait a minute, Val.
Beg your pardon?
Brooke has a question. Brooke has
No,
a very
okay,
pertinent
yes, Miss
question.
Cece. Yes, Miss Cece. That's why I'm gonna say that. This, because what Brooke have a very important question about our money, and we want to know about that. So, Mr. Toomey, can you answer about the emergency? You know, the emergency man. Thank you. We really appreciate
Sure.
it.
Yeah. So those yeah, I know years past those evacuation spots used to have information on them. They were actually labeled. It told you what they were. I know since I'm not sure when it stopped. They stopped updating those. I know the RTA doesn't own the evacuation spots, by the way. The RTA just incorporates inventory planning. But we are currently, to get the word out about how we support the CAEP. The RTA is doing outreach at senior centers and independent living centers throughout hurricane season. Last year we did about 35 outreach events. So we are willing to come out and speak to the public about what the plan entails. And then as far as having a visual information of, we were actually going to partner with the city to build out information in our transit hubs. Because every spot, our plan is that every bus stop can be used for an evacuation for general population. But then we can also provide additional details or information at the transit hubs themselves as we build out our transit hubs, which we really want to do. We have 5 of them right now. We want to make them a beautiful part of the city. So we just had a meeting last week with the city to talk about how we're going to start maybe working on that together. So that's those ways we're trying to get the word out about the CAEP.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Toomey.
Yeah.
So can anyone, I'm gonna say Ms. Ann, Councilman President JP, can anyone, even the general, Mr. Toomey, you might have some information about this, about the banks. About Brooke, can you ask your question right quick, and let's everybody be reminded that we are over our time. We do understand that you have to exit, but everyone want to know about their finance, I'm sure. So Brooke, can you ask that? Then CC, I'm gonna turn over to you you to close us out. And we're going to ask Reverend Jeff to close us out in the prayer. And please be reminded, put your information in the chat for you. We can add you on to our email, to our information, and check out our Facebook page. We thank you for coming in tonight and joining us on this very important forum. We thank the guests. And next, Brooke, then you, Miss Cece. Brooke, you're on mute.
I know. I'm doing that right now. There are several questions that we had lined up to ask after the regular questions were finished. So one of those is this, and we had two of our guests come on quite late, so we might consider going over just a little bit. But has the problem of accounts for local banks, because during Katrina, apparently there was a real problem of people just not being able to access their own money if they were hooked up with a local bank. So, without electricity, without anything, the only people who could get money were people who were part of, who had national financial institutions. So I don't know whether anyone on this call knows whether that has been remedied or not. There was some talk about it, apparently.
I don't have any information on that. I know when it comes to banking companies as banking as a whole, it's regulated by the federal government, not even by the state. I can reach out to the Louisiana Bankers Association and see if any policies have changed, but there has been a lot of trouble recently, just generally speaking, with local banks and being undercapitalized. And as I recall, during that time period, part of the reason why no one had access was because those banks that were in areas significantly impacted by hurricanes, they basically kind of turtled up and said, if we give away all the money that's entitled, it will make it so we are in a financially uncertain place. So I'll talk to the Louisiana Bankers Association and get an answer for you, but it's not something that council can regulate. And I don't even think it's something the state can regulate. Banks are purely a federal area.
Yeah, no, I figured that, but I just thought maybe somebody had their ear to the ground and knew whether it was happening, because it does put people in a really bad position if they're being local and using their local banks. So.
Well, it also doesn't help because, generally speaking, because of our experiences during Ida, I know at least from my family, we're more likely, if you've got a local bank, you're going to go make a run on all the ATM machines whenever there's a hurricane. So the problem they're trying to avoid by not making your money available after the hurricane, it's just as bad whenever you're runs to a local bank to pull their money out because they're scared.
True.
Okay, next, Miss Cece. You have any closing remarks?
I think
okay.
Brooke also had a second question, which I think is very important as well, and that is to ask if mental services and treatment would be available for evacuees who are in shelters, because it's very traumatic to have to leave your home. And also, what about the pets?
I'm sorry, Cece. I missed the first half of that question.
The question I was asking is NOLA ready, or people handling Homeland Security, whomever, will they provide mental health services to the people who are going to be evacuated, because it is quite a traumatic event to have to leave your home and not know where you're going? So will that be available at the Smoothie Center, for example? And then what about people's pets?
Yeah, so let me tackle the pets one, because that one's a little bit easier. We do work with the LASPCA and involve them in any conversations about sheltering or evacuation. We do have a part of the city assisted evacuation plan to account for people who bring pets, because pets are family too. And so whether or not you do depend on that pet for a service or emotional support, they're family. And so we recognize that people will want to take their pets. Again, though, if you have specific needs for your pets, or you want to be able to take more stuff with you, it's best for you to develop out an evacuation plan that doesn't rely on the city. When it comes to mental health is also a big, it's a big priority for the city, for my department, even for me. You know, I think this probably resonates with everyone on this call who lived through Katrina, that, you know, August 29th and really the month of August can be very difficult, very triggering. And so, you know, we do work with Metropolitan Human Service District to try to provide tips and information. One of the things that we would really like to further develop, and it's an ongoing process, is identifying crisis counselors to assist. But I think it was mentioned around the Smoothie King Center. Again, I just want to stress that the Smoothie King Center is not a place where we would want people to stay long term. If we were to use the Smoothie King Center, it would just be for pre-storm evacuation. And really that would be an in and out process. So there is a medical triage as a part of the plan for people who have special medical needs. But ideally people are spending no more than 10-15 minutes at the Smoothie King Center from getting off an RTA bus, or really just getting to the Smoothie King Center and being evacuated to a state-ran shelter. But we do want to factor in, and this is something that's an ongoing process of identifying mental health services and crisis counseling for our emergency resource centers, or for a refuge or shelter that the city decides to open if there is enough time for us to do it pre-storm or post-storm.
Okay.
Sorry,
Thank you so much. Valerie?
Yes.
Take it
Okay. Okay, well, while we're on a roll, I love this last one. Then we're gonna ask Miss Anna and President JP and Mr. Toomey, and also the general, if you want to make any closing remarks, you are feel free to make 2 minutes closing remarks. Have you all did any analysis or any study or any comparison with any other cities that have catastrophe or have hurricanes or storms like something similar to New Orleans or Louisiana? Can you start off with it, Miss Anna, then Mr. Toomey, then President JP, then the General? Please keep it like to 2 minutes, then as well do your closing remarks, please. Thank you.
Yeah, so we constantly are talking to other emergency management agencies about how they're dealing with their plans and how they're dealing with their hazards. You know, and so we constantly are doing that. We're constantly adapting ideas to make it work for New Orleans, because New Orleans is a city unlike any other, both culturally, historically, and even geographically. So it is challenging in some instances, such as contraflow or evacuation, to compare it to other areas, because, you know, if you really look at the map of New Orleans, we really only have one major interstate to get away from the coast, and that's I-10. You could look at doing, you know, the Pontchartrain Causeway. You could also look at I-55, but even I-55, you have to get on I-10 to get there, right? So we have that really unique challenge of, like, we have one interstate to get away from the coast, and that's something that we really have to factor into our emergency plans. You know, I saw a comment earlier about, you know, about having me come back. I'm happy to come back, or I'm happy to answer more questions or in writing, because this is really, a lot of this information is very nuanced. It is really difficult for us to put this on a one-page flyer, but, you know, our mission is to give you the most accurate information so that you can stay informed and make plans that that fit best for you and your family. And so I'll close by just saying, please visit ready.newell.gov. I'll also put my email in the chat, but if you have any questions at all, please feel free to reach out, and I will do my best to respond to you in a timely manner.
Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you. Okay, Mr. Craig?
Ma'am? Yeah, I'm here. I'm sorry. Yeah. So yeah, we are, like Anna said, we are in a very unique city. I've looked at other cities too, and a lot of them I'm not sure if a lot of them actually have like pickup points to actually evacuate folks. We have a unique role, obviously. We support evacuating folks to the Smoothie King Center, and then the state takes over and moves them out of the city. Whereas other transit agencies, I believe, have more of a regional area, so they can actually participate in evacuating people outside of their city limits. They also do it by zone too. But it's a really good question. I will research it. I'll look into some more. I'll talk to some other transit agencies and see if there's anything that's similar to us. But as of right now, I think we have a very unique structure here in our city for evacuation, and our partnership with the state as well. Probably from legacy Katrina, because obviously the biggest tragedy of Katrina was that we had many people that needed evacuated and buses were not showing up. So the solution to that was to always have. The last I heard, we have 3,000 state buses that are on contract to evacuate the area for a hurricane. That's the latest number, about 3,000 buses. So I think that's a legacy thing that's been planned post Katrina, but I'll definitely look into it and see if there's any other transit agencies that do things a little differently or similar to us.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Okay, President JP Morrell.
Yeah, I mean, I had the opportunity when I was a senator to kind of see what other cities in Louisiana did. And in my travels, I've actually been around the world as far as other coastal regions. There's a couple of unique challenges, and I think Anna identified a couple of them, as well as the guy who spoke before me. But the biggest challenge is, as a country, particularly in the South, we do not have the interconnected transit that really allows for robust evacuation. When you look at like the South, the Northeast, for example, there are a tremendous amount of railways available to push massive evacuations. And as Anna said, we really have, depending on which way the hurricane's coming, we have one way out, either end of the city. Either we're going east or we're going west, even to get the highways to go north. And we do have availability, and we do utilize Amtrak, and they're great partners for our one line out of the city. But that is very unusual for a major metropolitan area. Most metropolitan areas have 4, 5, 6, 7 train lines that are readily available for non-commercial human people use and transport. And it's just not sufficient. If anything, it goes to a lot of what many people said, including General Honoré. We really need to become more robust in calling for evacuations more readily, and for making sure people are provided the opportunity not just to evacuate, but also to have assurances they'll be brought back into the city timely. Because I know part of the issue when I talk to residents and why they don't leave is if they have to rely upon the state or the city to get out. Historically, the state and local governments are very bad at getting people back into the city. So if you actually do take advantage of buses or whatever transit there is available to get you to Houston or to get you to Austin or San Antonio, or even going west to Mobile or to somewhere in Florida, they will quickly get you a ticket to get there and then really struggle to get you back. And if you're someone like many people are in the city who are living check to check, who really are relying upon that ability that if the storm does miss us, your boss expects you to work the next day, it really makes you second guess evacuating. And until as a city and a state, we create more robust safety nets where people can make those decisions based upon what's safest for them and their family, and not worry about, if I do what's best for my family, are we not going to be able to pay our rent and our bills for the next 2 months? That's on us. We have to figure that piece out. And until we figure it out, we can't be upset when people go, well, I can't really afford to evacuate. Because what I hear oftentimes is, I'm scared, but I don't know if I can afford to leave.
Yes, right. That's right. Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, President, are you through, President JP?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Okay, we had the last remark from the general. General, you gonna close us out? Then we have an announcement by Mr. Gonzalez. And I'm pronouncing your name right? I'm sorry. Okay, good. We have the last remark by the general.
Well, thank you. Evacuation is a key to survival of these storms where they're coming in. Actually, on the questions, people come to New Orleans to study evacuation. During Katrina, as horrific as it was, 80% of the city evacuated. As clumsy as it was, as some of the crazy stuff going on with, they had a Saints game on the Friday before Katrina. And the New Orleans School Board decided to have school that Friday. It was calling for evacuation. The school board said, well, if the Saints going to play football tonight, we ought to keep the schools open. What people going to do with their children to go to the game, if they're staying to go to the game? We've got to stop that kind of stupid. And when the mayor called for an evacuation, I don't care if the Saints do have a game scheduled, they got to close. But evacuation is the key to survival. The city has a good plan. The question is, are we committed to executing? There's one plan in Florida the state should consider about it, and that is mandatory generators at gas stations. To the legislature, they got nowhere with it. I took it there twice because we find out when we lose power and people come back home, if they can't get gas, they can't survive and they can't return, because we have a problem in Louisiana cycling the trucks to keep the gas stations full, and that we don't have a mandatory rule for all the gas stations to have generators. And it's good for the merchant, because if he's got gas, he's going to sell everything he got in the store, he or she. So we still got to fix that. But another thing, Florida has mandatory generator requirements at certain gas stations. They also have an organization that's organized by the state to pick up the elderly at home and evacuate them. You know, we think a lot of the elderly people that are in the nursing homes, but we still got elderly people that don't drive that are at home. And Florida has a well-organized organization that have people pre-registered, and when it's time evacuation, they pick them up and leave them in the shelters. And it's led by a retired Marine colonel, and we should do the same thing. Louisiana is organized transportation to get the elderly at their homes, because many of them will not have anybody to take them out. And I remind people, Trina, the biggest loss of life was elderly people at home alone. Over 60% of the people who died during Katrina were home alone, they're elderly and they're poor, or they had disabilities. That vulnerable population, we still got to work on. And no other city has ever evacuated 80% of their population like we did for Katrina. The problem was that 20% that stayed behind was in a bad shape because the city flooded. So let's get prepared, folks. You talk about cash, you know, you got to go get some cash before the storm comes. There's some of these things government ain't good enough to fix. I'm going to say this again. The government ain't good enough to get you ready. It ain't good enough to take care of the issues are just too. So able-bodied people got to take care of themselves. I'm going to say that again. Able-bodied people.
Well, he cut off, but he said able-bodied people got to take care of themselves. So we're going to turn it over to Mr. Gonzalez, and Mr. Jeff going to end us up with a prayer. Mr. Gonzalez, have an announcement?
Yeah. Hey, everyone. I'm Axel. I'm an organizer with National Nurses United, the nurses union. Really good to be here with everyone. Mike, who's a nurse at Tulane Medical Center, is actually going to give the announcement. So I'll turn it over to him.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Wonderful. I know we're over time, so I promise I will be very brief. As you said, my name is Mike Robertshaw. I'm a nurse at Tulane Medical Center downtown on our surgical ICU, as well as a member of First Grace United Methodist Church. And so I just wanted to get on the call and firstly say thank you to all of the panelists for all that wonderful information. Super grateful for that. Very, very helpful. And then the announcement that I have actually, I think, does tie into this conversation in a different way. We wanted to invite everybody on this phone call to a public hearing that we are holding this Saturday in Duncan Plaza at 10 a.m. As many of you know, Tulane Medical Center, or may not know, was sold or purchased by LCMC. The current plan is to close Tulane Medical Center downtown, which would already cause a grave strain on our already strained healthcare system in our city, particularly during hurricanes. The current plan, as I said, is to move all the services to East Jefferson. And the problem is that the public, the working people of New Orleans have yet to have had the chance to really weigh in on this and make their voices heard on this loss to our community. And so we, the nurses who have been working to form a union to improve care, are working to bring this to the community to give them that opportunity to voice their concerns and how the closure of a major downtown access point for care will affect them. Just quickly, I will say that the Federal Trade Commission has actually weighed in on this, and the deal is now part of a lawsuit because the Federal Trade Commission has done a lot of studies on this. And one of the things that they have found is that when these sales are done through state regulatory processes, that costs go up for patients, access goes down, and wages are driven down. And so right now we want to use this opportunity with Federal Trade Commission's involvement to really shed light on a topic that has been largely kept in the dark. And so I just want to say thank you all so much for your time and allowing me to come on and talk about that. We are going to be doing a community hearing in Duncan Plaza on Saturday, this Saturday at 10 a.m. And I believe Axel's going to be putting some links into the chat so you can kind of read up on that. So thank you so much.
Thank you for the announcement, Mike. We really appreciate it. He putting it in the chat so we can get it and we can put it out there. Thank you. Okay, Reverend Jeff. We thank everybody for joining. We really appreciate it. We are very sorry about keeping you over, but this is very important information, and we do thank you for staying. Reverend Jeff.
All right. Thank you. God of love and concern for all of us, we pray that all of us will work together to ensure that all are cared for. We pray, oh God, for this hurricane season. We first of all pray that we would not have a hurricane, but God, we also want you to help us as we prepare in case we do. Give us the wisdom, give us the courage, give us the strength, give us the knowledge, give us all that we need so that we can care for all who need. And we ask these things in your name. Amen.
Amen. Everybody be safe. Have a good night.
All right. Good night.